John Dawlish. When you think of the most powerful Aurors in Harry Potter, John Dawlish might seem like a strange place to start. After all, his reputation isn't built on legendary victories, but on a string of humiliations. So why is he still remembered? And what does his story tell us about the brutal reality of being an Auror in Voldemort's world? Dawlish had everything you'd expect from a top-tier recruit. A British pure-blood wizard, he graduated from Hogwarts with outstanding grades in every single new T subject he took, a step above the already grueling exceeds expectations requirement. To get into the Auror office, you needed to ace defense against the dark arts, charms, transfiguration, potions, and herbology. Dawlish not only did it, but did it perfectly. On paper, he was the Ministry's dream soldier, disciplined, loyal, and magically gifted. But reality isn't written on paper. The first time readers meet Dawlish in Order of the Phoenix, he's escorting Cornelius Fudge to confront Dumbledore. And here's where things start to unravel. Dumbledore, accused of treason, doesn't bother arguing with the minister. Instead, he makes his escape, stunning Dawlish with a flick of his wand. One moment, Dawlish was an excellent Auror, a title even Dumbledore once used. The next, he was sprawled unconscious on the office floor. From there, Dawlish's career becomes a pattern of being outmatched. He was repeatedly sent to tail Dumbledore, only to end up jinxed by the very wizard he was meant to shadow. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore even jokes to Harry that he had to jinx Dawlish again with the greatest regret. It's almost comical, this supposedly elite Auror brought down again and again by the same man. And yet, we can't call him incompetent. Dawlish's failures weren't because he lacked skill. They were because he was thrown against impossible odds. How many wizards could honestly withstand Dumbledore in a duel? Or successfully subdue Hagrid, a half-giant immune to most spells? Dawlish's real mistake was being the Ministry's yes-man, constantly deployed on suicide missions against opponents no ordinary Auror could overcome. By the time of the Second Wizarding War, Dawlish's name had become almost synonymous with bad luck. In Deathly Hallows, he was confunded by Augusta Longbottom when he tried to arrest Neville and later humiliated again while carrying out the Ministry's oppressive orders under Voldemort's puppet government. He always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The perfect target for ridicule, but also a reminder of just how stacked the odds were against anyone who wasn't Harry, Dumbledore, or Voldemort. So what do we make of Dawlish? Was he really a poor Auror, or was he just the Ministry's scapegoat, the man always sent into unwinnable situations? In many ways, Dawlish represents the forgotten side of magical law enforcement. The Aurors who weren't legends. The ones who got stunned, jinxed, or overpowered, but kept showing up anyway because the Ministry demanded it. Tina Goldstein. Tina Goldstein is the underdog who proved herself against one of the most dangerous wizards in history. But what makes her story so fascinating is how easily she could have been overlooked, until she found herself standing across from Gellert Grindelwald. Tina, short for Porpentina, was an American half-blood witch who studied at Ilvermorny, the North American equivalent of Hogwarts. She excelled there and after graduation joined MACUSA, the Magical Congress of the United States, as an Auror. Already, that tells us something. Aurors in America were no less selective than those in Britain. She had to prove herself academically, magically, and morally fit to serve. But unlike the seasoned, battle-scarred figures like Moody or Scrimgeour, Tina's rise was quieter. She wasn't a household name. She was simply one more capable witch in a demanding office. So how did she make this list? The answer is simple. She went toe-to-toe with Grindelwald. Her first real test came when Grindelwald was disguised as Percival Graves, a high-ranking Auror inside MACUSA. When Tina clashed with him, most witches and wizards would have been outmatched instantly. Grindelwald, even holding back, was leagues beyond ordinary fighters. Yet Tina didn't collapse. She held her ground, dueling fiercely enough to prove that she belonged on the battlefield against one of the most powerful dark wizards who ever lived. But the most dramatic display of her strength came later, during the events of the Crimes of Grindelwald. Grindelwald unleashed his Protego Diabolica, a massive ring of cursed black fire that incinerated anyone it judged unworthy. Dozens of skilled wizards faltered before its destructive power. Tina, however, managed to resist it, shielding herself and others with a sustained charm. Holding back a spell of that magnitude required extraordinary magical stamina and nerve. That single moment secured her reputation as not just competent, but exceptional. What makes Tina even more impressive is her versatility. She demonstrated natural ability in apparition, nonverbal magic, charms, and transfiguration. She was a quick duelist, but she also had the softer skills of investigation, stealth, observation, and emotional intelligence that made her an effective Auror beyond just combat. She balanced empathy with authority, which is partly why MACUSA trusted her with high-level assignments in both New York and Paris. Still, curiosity lingers. How far could she have gone if the Fantastic Beasts saga had continued her story? Would she have risen to the American equivalent of head Auror, perhaps even minister? Or was her greatest legacy simply surviving face-to-face encounters with Grindelwald, encounters that could have ended in instant death for almost anyone else? Kingsley Shacklebolt. Some Aurors are remembered for their dueling scars, others for their legendary arrests. Kingsley Shacklebolt, he's remembered for both, and for something even rarer. He's the Auror who made the leap from ministry operative to respected leader of the entire wizarding world. But how did a man known for his quiet composure end up ranked among the strongest Aurors of all time? Kingsley's early years remain a mystery, but by the time we meet him in Order of the Phoenix, he's already a top-ranked Auror inside the Ministry of Magic. He's tall, bald, and carries himself with the calm authority of someone who doesn't need to shout to command a room. Within the ministry, he was trusted with one of the most sensitive jobs imaginable, serving as a personal guard to the Muggle Prime Minister. That tells us everything. The ministry wouldn't assign anyone less than their very best to protect the leader of an entire nation. But Kingsley wasn't just a bureaucrat, he was also a double agent. Outwardly, he played the part of a loyal ministry man, carrying out assignments with Cornelius Fudge and later Rufus Scrimgeour. Secretly, he was a member of the Order of the Phoenix, working directly against Voldemort's rise. Balancing those two worlds, feeding information to the Order while not blowing his cover inside the ministry, required brains, nerve, and magical ability of the highest order. His combat record speaks volumes. During the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, Kingsley fought on the front lines against Death Eaters. Later, in the Battle of the Seven Potters, he was pursued by 5 Death Eaters while protecting Hermione. Even in those impossible odds, he managed to stun 2 attackers and still make a successful escape. Few Aurors could boast that level of composure under pressure. And his magic wasn't one-dimensional. Kingsley demonstrated mastery across disciplines: transfiguration, charms, defensive spells, apparition, and even flying. He was an expert duelist, but also had the tactical mind to organize defenses, direct allies, and improvise when things fell apart. His fellow Order members respected him deeply, and perhaps the most telling sign of his strength comes from Voldemort himself. Even the Dark Lord considered Kingsley a serious threat. Voldemort did not waste his fear on mediocrity. The story doesn't end with Voldemort's defeat. Where many Aurors burned out or faded into history, Kingsley rose higher. After the Battle of Hogwarts, he was appointed Minister for Magic. And unlike his predecessors, who were often portrayed as weak, corrupt, or indecisive, Kingsley's tenure was marked by stability and reform. He cleaned out corruption, restored trust in the ministry, and rebuilt after the devastation of the war. In other words, he was more than a fighter. He was a statesman. He was the calm in the storm, the man who could duel a Death Eater in the morning and address the wizarding world by evening. That combination, rare in any era, is what elevates Kingsley Shacklebolt into the upper ranks of the most powerful Aurors in history. Rufus Scrimgeour. Rufus Scrimgeour was the battlefield commander. He wasn't polished like Fudge or politically slick like Thicknessy, he was a man of action. In fact, even Dumbledore described him with that exact phrase. But being a man of action in Voldemort's Britain came at a steep price. Scrimgeour's career began in the Auror office, where he quickly rose through the ranks. His appearance alone told you who he was. Leonine, with a mane of graying hair, battle-worn and scarred from years of duels. This wasn't a man who spent his life behind a desk. He had been in the thick of the fight against dark wizards for decades, which is why he eventually rose to become head of the Auror office, the top post for magical law enforcement. That title carried weight. To oversee Britain's Aurors meant not just tactical genius, but also magical prowess. Scrimgeour had both. He was decisive, respected by his subordinates, and known for a no-nonsense approach. Unlike Fudge, who always seemed to be one step behind events, Scrimgeour anticipated threats and took action. It was this reputation that landed him the role of Minister for Magic after Fudge was forced to resign. But Scrimgeour's ministry was far from triumphant. Voldemort was back, fear was spreading, and the wizarding world needed hope. Scrimgeour's solution? Harry Potter.
To Harry James Potter.
He repeatedly tried to recruit Harry as a symbol of resistance, parading him in public as proof that the boy who lived supported the ministry. Harry, of course, refused, seeing through the political manipulation. These clashes showed the tension at the heart of Scrimgeour's leadership. He was a seasoned fighter but not a skilled politician. He was a lion forced into a cage of propaganda and bureaucracy. Still, one act defined his place among the most powerful Aurors, his final stand. When Voldemort's forces took control of the Ministry, Scrimgeour was captured. Voldemort personally interrogated him for information on Harry's whereabouts. Scrimgeour resisted. Despite being tortured, he refused to betray Harry, protecting the boy's movements even with his last breath. He was killed for his defiance, but his refusal to break under Voldemort's pressure cemented his legacy. Think about that for a moment. Facing Voldemort wasn't something most wizards could even survive for seconds, yet Scrimgeour held out long enough that his death was marked as an act of defiance. In a world where so many bent under the Dark Lord's will, he didn't. That alone places him in rare company. So why does Scrimgeour matter? Because he embodied the reality of the Auror's job. He wasn't flashy, and he wasn't flawless. He was battered, pragmatic, and sometimes politically clumsy. But when it came down to it, he gave everything to the fight. Rufus Scrimgeour didn't live to see Voldemort fall, but his courage helped keep hope alive long enough for others to finish the fight. And that's why he's remembered as one of the greatest Aurors to ever live, Alastor Moody. When you think Auror, one name rises above the rest, Alastor Moody.
Stinking, cowardly, scummy, butt-shooting.
Known as Mad-Eye to his friends, and even more to his enemies, he was the most feared dark wizard catcher of his generation. His magical eye, his scarred face, and his wooden leg became symbols of a man who survived more battles than most wizards could even imagine. But what made Moody so terrifying to the dark side, and so respected among the light? Moody's career was forged in the crucible of the First Wizarding War. While many witches and wizards shrank back as Voldemort rose, Moody fought on the front lines. He personally captured so many Death Eaters that his name alone carried weight inside Azkaban. Those who found themselves locked behind the fortress's bars often had Moody to thank, or curse, and he didn't come out of those years unscathed. He lost an eye, a leg, and part of his nose in battle. Each scar was a reminder of the countless duels he fought and survived. His magical arsenal was staggering. Moody was a master of dueling, charms, defensive spells, transfiguration, apparition, non-verbal magic, and even occlumency. He embodied the idea of constant vigilance, a phrase he drilled into every young witch and wizard he mentored. For him, paranoia wasn't a flaw, it was a survival tactic, and it worked. But perhaps the most telling mark of Moody's power is how Voldemort himself regarded him. When the Dark Lord learned Harry would be moved in the Battle of the Seven Potters, he assumed Moody would be protecting him, and he targeted Moody first. Think about that. Out of everyone in the Order, Voldemort believed Moody was the greatest threat. That says more than any Ministry commendation ever could. Of course, Moody's legend is complicated. In Goblet of Fire, the Mad-Eye we meet is actually Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise. It's a cruel twist because Crouch Jr. impersonated him so perfectly, complete with the magical eye and grizzled paranoia, that it blurred the line between fact and legend. But when the real Moody finally appeared in the flesh, in Order of the Phoenix, he matched that reputation. He led the advance guard to safely escort Harry to Grimmauld Place, planned operations against Voldemort, and never stopped fighting despite his age and injuries. His end was sudden, brutal, and tragic. During the Battle of the Seven Potters, Voldemort's killing curse struck him down. It wasn't supposed to hit him. The curse was meant for Mundungus Fletcher, who panicked and disapparated mid-flight. Moody died instantly. For many, it felt almost wrong. How could the great Mad-Eye, who had survived everything, fall in such a messy, unlucky way? But perhaps that's the truth of war. Even the strongest can't predict every turn. Moody's legacy is carved into wizarding history. In the end, Mad-Eye Moody was more than the scars, the eye, or the paranoia. He was the embodiment of constant vigilance, and the greatest Auror of them all. Not every powerful Auror could fit into the top 5. Some made their mark in quieter ways, others left their legacy in tragedy, and a few belonged to a different era altogether. Here are the names that didn't quite crack the rankings but still demand recognition. Harry Potter. After Voldemort's defeat, Harry could have retired into legend. Instead, he joined the Auror Office. Alongside Ron Weasley, he entered directly into service without the usual NEWT requirements, an exception granted because of his role in the war. But here's the curiosity. Was Harry really suited to being an Auror? On one hand, his dueling experience, instincts, and Patronus mastery made him ideal. On the other, Harry had always been more reactive than methodical. Still, the Auror Office under Harry's generation was different. They weren't chasing nameless dark wizards in the shadows, they were rebuilding a broken world. Harry eventually rose to head of the Auror office, transforming it into a respected branch once again. His presence alone deterred corruption, proving that sometimes a name carries as much power as a wand. Percival Graves. In the Fantastic Beasts era, Percival Graves was head Auror of MACUSA. At least he was until Grindelwald impersonated him. That impersonation creates an odd curiosity gap. How much of Graves's reputation was his own, and how much was Grindelwald's handiwork? What we do know is that Graves had climbed high enough to wield immense authority. MACUSA's head Auror wasn't a desk role. It meant command over magical law enforcement in an entire continent. The fact Grindelwald chose him as his disguise speaks volumes. He needed someone respected, feared, and positioned perfectly inside the system. Graves's true achievements are harder to trace, but his title alone makes him worthy of a mention here. Theseus Scamander. Newt Scamander's older brother Theseus was nicknamed the War Hero Auror. He fought with distinction in the First World War, which already set him apart from his peers. Later, he became head Auror for the British Ministry of Magic. Unlike Newt, who thrived in the shadows of magical creatures, Theseus was a man of the spotlight. He stood with Dumbledore and other heavyweights against Grindelwald in Paris, dueling in one of the most chaotic magical battles of the era. Theseus's inclusion reminds us that Auror's strength isn't just about who wins duels, it's about leadership. He had the charisma to lead squads, the magical ability to survive high-stakes confrontations, and the authority to shape Auror policy. Without him, the fight against Grindelwald would have looked very different. Ron Weasley. It's easy to forget that Ron actually worked as an Auror after the Battle of Hogwarts. Ron contributed to the cleanup of Voldemort's scattered forces. But Ron's Auror career was short-lived. After a couple of years, he left the office to help George at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. That decision raises the question, could Ron have become one of the greats if he'd stayed? He had battlefield experience, tactical creativity, and a knack for improvisation that had saved lives in the hunt for Horcruxes. But Ron never craved the spotlight. For him, family and laughter mattered more than law enforcement. He was good enough to succeed as an Auror. He just chose not to. And in that choice, he showed a strength of character that makes him memorable in his own way. Frank and Alice Longbottom. Few Aurors paid a higher price for their service than Neville's parents. Frank and Alice Longbottom were legendary fighters during the First Wizarding War. They were members of the original Order of the Phoenix and were among the last to keep resisting Voldemort's forces. But their bravery led to one of the darkest tragedies in the wizarding world. After Voldemort's fall, Bellatrix Lestrange and her allies tortured Frank and Alice with the Cruciatus Curse until their minds broke. They lived the rest of their lives at St. Mungo's, unable to recognize even their son. Here's what makes their story resonate. They weren't defeated in battle, they were destroyed in the aftermath. That's the price of being an Auror when wars end but grudges remain. Frank and Alice remind us that Aurors didn't just risk death. They risked everything, even their sanity.